So a little while ago, I did a Fire Emblem 6 balance patch just for fun. It was just something I threw together over the span of 48 hours using some knowledge that I've acquired through learning how to hack Fire Emblem. And I didn't really expect it to blow up like it did, but the video got over 50,000 views and a lot of people downloaded the hack and played it. And that makes me really happy because I had a lot of fun making it. So I thought, hey, why not do it again? This time for Fire Emblem 7. So Fire Emblem 7 is a game that I'm certainly not the first one to try and rebalance it, but I would say it's probably the game that's rebalanced the least. I think Fire Emblem 6 and Fire Emblem 8 are far more popular choices when it comes to rebalancing and reduxes and whatnot. However, I thought to myself that there's a lot of things about Fire Emblem 7 that always annoys me every time I play through it, and it would be really cool if some of these issues were fixed. At the same time, there's also a lot of cool stuff that I wish was in Fire Emblem 7, and so I took it upon myself to create a Fire Emblem 7 balance patch, although I certainly took some more liberties with this one. Don't get me wrong, it is still very much Fire Emblem 7, I have not changed the core game in any way, but I have buffed a bunch of characters like I did with Fire Emblem 6, I've even included some new ones, and I've changed some enemies around, and generally done my best to make the whole experience a little bit less clunky and tedious. So yeah, I'm just gonna go through all the changes that I did, and as always, if you check out the video description, there's a link to the Mang's hacking archive. It is a Discord channel which you cannot chat in, you can just download hacks. There you can find all the other projects that I've done, and it's also the Discord server where Underon Saga is going to be released in the future, so it's a good place to be. And yeah, you can find this hack there right now, so if you just want to go and play it, you can. However, if you want to know what I've actually changed, then you can watch this video. So yeah, let's begin. So the first change that I've done to the game is to the mode select. All of the modes are available right from the start. There is no need to go and play Lyn mode first. If you want to jump straight into Hector hard mode, you can. However, I've done some major changes to both Eliwood hard mode and Lyn hard mode. They now have the exact same hard mode bonuses as Hector hard mode, so they are both much more challenging. I still think that Hector hard mode is the most difficult mode because it features much more varied enemies, but now Eliwood hard mode will have the same stats on the enemies as Hector does, so it's a lot more challenging than it used to be. So if you've been wanting to play Eliwood hard mode again, but you kind of thought it was a little bit too easy, now you can go and play that. Now, as for Lyn mode, I have actually completely reworked it. It now features much more enemies with much better equipment. It's not super hard by any means, but I've definitely made the maps more challenging and engaging, so playing through Lyn mode shouldn't be the snorefest that it used to be. You might actually fail a couple times, especially if you play on hard mode. Now, this does come with the side effect of there being a little bit more experience available in Lyn mode because there are more enemies, so you might notice maybe a few more levels at the end for some of your characters. So this means that playing through Lyn mode before continuing on with Eliwood and Hector hard mode, it's gonna be a little bit easier. However, I have also buffed these two modes in various ways, so yeah, I'm gonna go into that next. There are three kinds of enemies which are a known joke in Fire Emblem 7. The first one are the Pegasus Knights, which are quite frequent in Hector's story. Because of their garbage constitution, they get doubled by everything, and they're not really a threat to anyone. In addition to increasing their constitution by 1 across the board, I've given them much higher skill and speed, so not only will they be far more accurate, but they might even double some of your units now. However, I've also added triple effective damage on this patch, so your archers will be incredibly good against those Pegasus Knights. I've also increased the might of bows by 2 across the board, so this actually makes archers a lot better, and quite necessary for dealing with enemy flyers. Due to the triple effectiveness change, weapons like the Manikadi are also insanely good now, which I think Lyn fans will appreciate. The second type of enemies which I've buffed are the monks. In the vanilla game, they are just a complete joke with horrible stats across the board. I've just given them the stats to be roughly on par with other enemies now. And I've also buffed light magic at 1 extra might, so it hits a little bit harder. The third type of enemy I've buffed are the soldiers. They're still weaker than most other enemies, with relatively low skill and speed, but they're no longer complete jokes. As a result, the Kale and Green units are a little tougher as well, which makes them easier to keep alive. On Elliewood and Hector Hard mode, you're gonna start to notice a few extra promoted generic enemies in the maps of the late game. The final stretch of Fire Emblem 7 is filled with weak cannon fodder, and it gets very repetitive. So I've swapped out a few generic enemies with their promoted counterparts in increasing numbers as you start getting into the late game. If you think this sounds scary, you can just avoid it by playing on normal mode. Like I did in the Fire Emblem 6 balance patch, many bosses in this game now have increased stats and equipment, similar to how they worked in the Japanese version of Fire Emblem 7. Yeah, if you don't know, a lot of bosses were actually nerfed in the localization. Some bosses will even move to attack you now, instead of just standing still and taking javelins and hand axes to the face. In the chapter Unfulfilled Heart, Vida will actually start chasing you after a while, so you better be prepared to run from her. However, the Uber Spear no longer increases her offensive stats, it just protects her from harm, making it practically impossible for you to kill her. She's still a very scary boss, but she won't one-round everyone in your army anymore like she used to. The chapter Victory or Death is now a really tough challenge if you play on hard mode. The generic enemies here are on par with those you encounter in the Binding Blade late game, meaning they are incredibly strong. I always thought it was a bit anticlimactic how you get so much time to prepare for this chapter with an entire Gaiden dedicated to shopping, only to curb stomp your way through it with little difficulty. This chapter will be one of the hardest challenges you will face in this hack, and you better have trained up a strong squad when it comes around. Now, as for the endgame, let's just say it's a proper finale now. There are no more generic morphs, everyone you see has a name, and there are a lot of new faces to fight. Additionally, just like in the Japanese version of Fire Emblem 7, 2 doors will open every turn instead of 1. And as for the final battle, let's just say it's quite a challenge too. A single Luna crit will not give you an easy victory here. And oh yeah, speaking of Luna, Athos is of course still amazing, and he can help you out a lot, but in this hack he can only use anima magic, so you can't rely on him to just curb stomp the finale. If you want a strong Aureola or Luna user, you will have to train one yourself. However, I've also enhanced your tools to deal with this challenge. The Armads and Durandal now have their Fire Emblem 6 weight values, meaning they don't weigh down Elliewood and Hector as much as they used to. And as for the crappy Soul Coddy that Lyn gets, it no longer exists, because it sucks and no one likes it. Athos now instead gives Lyn the Mullet Gear, a legendary weapon on par with those Elliewood and Hector gets. And trust me, she will need it. Speaking of your lords, you can now promote your main lord first in their respective story. Want to promote Hector in Chapter 26 of Hector mode? Well, now you can. In the event that normally force promotes your lord after you beat Cog of Destiny, Athos will instead just hand you a 3rd Heaven Seal. The event is a little glitchy though, so just bear with me, I'm not very good at this stuff. For some reason, Hector will just stand still for a very long while instead of force promoting, making it look like the game is soft-locked. But if you're impatient, you can just use the emulator speedup function to get through this event faster. It will end eventually, I promise you guys. As for other minor changes, slim weapons actually have a purpose now. They get a lot of crit, so they're kinda like very accurate mini killer weapons. Poison is also very deadly now. It will kill you if you don't cure it, so antitoxins and restore staves are necessary. Though I have removed a ton of generic poison weapons from the game as a whole, they are much rarer now, but when you encounter them, you better have a response. I've also put a few extra promotional items on generic enemies here and there, because no one likes sitting around waiting for a guiding ring for 5 chapters before being able to promote their mage. Thieves can also now promote to assassins with a hero crest or an earth seal, because, let's be honest, except for Jafar, assassins are kinda bad, and locking them behind a fell contract that can be sold for 25,000 gold is just asinine. The same goes for Dart, he can promote to a berserker with a hero crest. The ocean seal is just dumb. Because there are so many new hero crest users, I've added a bunch of stealable hero crests to the game on generic enemies, so be on the lookout for them. Oh, and yeah, speaking about stealable items, assassins can still steal now, because it's stupid that they forget to do that after they promote. I have also sped up the time required to build supports. You now get them about twice as quick. In my opinion, there are 2 kinds of players, those that go for supports and those who don't. And for those who want to build supports, this basically just cuts down on the amount of turns you have to press wait. So I don't really think that this is nerfing the game in any big way. Those who don't care about supports still won't randomly activate them unless they're trying to get them. Lastly, the Devil Axe have been buffed, because I am Manx, and this is what I do. Anyway, with those changes covered, it's now time to go over the units. I think this is what most people are excited about. As with my Fire Emblem 6 balance patch, I have not changed a single growth rate of any playable unit, nor have I nerfed any unit except for Athos and his weapon rank, because I don't think nerfing a game necessarily makes it more fun. Instead, I have only buffed the base stats of certain units that I think badly needs it. Let's begin with Lyn. Lyn is in a really tricky spot in Vanilla FE7. She's weak, frail, and a huge liability. Her personal weapon sucks, she dies, and it's just a pain to train her. I know she can become good eventually, but considering she's a main character, it's a travesty that she's so garbage for such a big part of the game. So I've given her a very simple +2 HP, +2 strength, and +2 speed. This, in addition to the fact that her Monikati is really good now, should make her a lot easier to train. Additionally, once you promote her to Blade Lord, she gets the same crit bonus that Swordmasters get, and she also gets C rank in bows, allowing her to use killer bows right off the bat. This combined with the Mulligar in the late game actually makes Lyn incredible. Next up is Eliwood, and Eliwood is in a pretty rough spot as well, being a sword-locked lord like Lyn, and he has a tendency of just being stuck with very poor strength and speed and not being able to do anything. So I've given him a pretty simple +2 strength, +2 speed, and with that I think he should be able to snowball quite effectively. He still becomes pretty strong in the late game, but I feel like this buff is needed in the early game. Then we have Hector, and while I think Hector doesn't necessarily need any buffs, he's quite strong already. He is a little bit inaccurate in the early game, so I've given him +3 skill. It's a very small buff, but it should make the earlier chapters a little bit less RNG dependent, as if he misses in those, things can go pretty badly for you, especially on Hector hard mode. Additionally, I've also given him +1 move from his promotion. Hector's promotion is by far the worst out of the 3 lords. He only gets some stats and swords, which is really bad for him, and he also gets a vulnerability to armor slayers, which is kind of unfair. So yeah, I figured that +1 extra move was warranted. I know he's supposed to be a general, and so he shouldn't have a lot of move, but he's also the main character. Next up, we have the 3 Cavaliers, Kent, Sane, and Lowen. While I definitely think they're decent in Fire Emblem 7, what I want them to do is stand apart from each other, and so I've kinda ran with their already established gimmicks and just improved upon those. Sane is the strong one, so he gets +2 base strength. Kent is the fast and skilled one, so he gets +2 base skill and speed, and Lowen is supposed to be the tanky one, so he gets +2 base defense. The goal behind these changes is to make the Cavaliers feel very different from one another and have clear defined roles. Next up, we have the fighters Dorcas and Bartra, and once again, I've ran with the gimmick of giving them each a distinct theme. I think that Bartra was always supposed to be the aggressive fighter, and Dorcas was supposed to be the defensive fighter, but this never really came true all that well in their stats, especially considering Bartra's base speed is so atrocious. So with Bartra, I simply gave him +3 base speed, so that he's able to double a little bit more reliably, and with Dorcas, I gave him +3 base defense, so he's actually incredibly tanky now. Now, on a side note, if you play Lyn hard mode, Dorcas will actually get a few bonuses to his stats, since I've enabled hard mode bonuses for that route. It was a bit of an unintended change, but I kinda like it. So yeah, if you play Lyn hard mode, Dorcas will be a little bit better. Next up are the archers Will and Rebecca. Now, with bows having triple effectiveness against flyers, and also 2 extra might across the board, archers are actually in a really good spot in this patch, but I still wanted Will and Rebecca to feel distinct and different from one another. Now, the way I viewed them, Will was always supposed to be the strong archer, whereas Rebecca was supposed to be the fast archer. So I've given Will 3 extra points of base strength, while I've given Rebecca 3 extra points of base speed. Will hits incredibly hard now, whereas Rebecca will actually reliably double from the start. Next up, we have Sarah. Sarah is a pretty useful unit in Fire Emblem 7 because she's pretty much the only early game healer, but once Priscilla joins, she just tends to get benched by most people because her base magic is so atrocious. So with Sarah, I've just given her a very simple +3 base magic, so that she can actually keep up a little bit now. I still think people will prefer Priscilla's mounted movement, but this change should make it a little bit easier for Sarah to top off units, and if she promotes to Bishop, she'll hit a little bit harder. Keep in mind that light magic is also slightly buffed in this patch, so Bishop Sarah should actually be a pretty decent combat unit now. Next up is Urk. Now, even if you train him up in Lin mode, I find that he's still in a pretty rough spot, and if you don't play Lin mode, he is almost unusable, especially on Hector hard mode. His stats are just not very high. So I've given him +2 extra magic, +2 speed, as well as +3 luck. This should make it a little bit easier for him to do damage and maybe even double, and the extra luck is going to help out his avoid a little bit and make him avoid those nasty low percentage criticals, which he is very liable to face in the early game. Next up is Florina, and being a flyer, she has pretty decent utility in this game, even if you don't fight with her, so I didn't really want to buff her too much, but I ended up just giving her a very simple +1 to all bases. I know it's not a very exciting buff, but I feel like buffing her in any major ways is just going to make her broken, because flyers are incredibly strong. However, at base, especially if you don't play Lin mode, Florina struggles to do damage and keep up with the enemies, so this little buff should make it a little bit easier for her to start snowballing. Next up is Dart, and while Dart has some pretty insane potential as a berserker, I mean, if you train him, you get a really strong unit. I just find that his early game is kinda trash. His base skill and speed is just really shaky. He struggles to hit things, and he certainly does not double reliably, which is pretty bad in Fire Emblem 7. So I've given him a very simple +2 skill and +2 speed. I feel like that's all he really needs to get going. His other stats are fine. Next up is Fiora. I feel like Fiora is in an even rougher spot than her younger sister. At least Florina has many chapters to be trained if you want to train her up, whereas Fiora joins much later, and by the time she joins, the game is starting to get pretty difficult. And not only that, I always feel like during the Dread Isle arc, there's so many different units that you want to train, and it's kind of hard to find experience for Fiora. You can certainly prioritize her if you want, she has many opportunities to grow, but it's just kind of tricky to do. And I kind of find that her stats are very meh. She has very low strength, and they're just low in most areas, and the one thing she's supposed to be good at, which is speed, kind of gets hampered by her low con. Now, I don't want to buff her con because that reduces her aid, which hampers her ability to rescue, which is one of the big utility of Pegasus Knights. What I've done with Fiora is a very simple +3 bonus to her strength to help her damage output, and then just +1 in every other stat, kind of similar to what I did with Florina. So I feel like this should just make her a little bit more competitive. She should be able to keep up, should be a lot easier to start training her. Next up is Legoltz, and Legoltz is kind of your replacement thief if you lost Matthew, at least that's how I view him. Although he is a little bit better at fighting than Matthew is, I mean, unless you got a very blessed Matthew, that is. But still, I kind of find it weird that a former Four Fang that is renowned for his great skill is kind of like a thief with rather mediocre combat stats. Now, don't get me wrong, Legoltz's offense with the Steel Sword is actually surprisingly good, but I still feel like he should be better at fighting, so I've given him +2 strength as well as +4 skill. Now, due to hard mode bonuses, his stats can vary a little bit, but this should be how he should look when you see him. Next up, we have Isadora, and I think we can all agree that she is one of the most disappointing pre-promotes of this game. All of her stats are just kinda low, and the one thing that she's supposed to be really good at, which is speed, just gets hampered by the fact that her con is utter garbage. I mean, her bases aren't even that much better than Marcus, and you get Marcus in Chapter 1, and that just puts Isadora in such a rough spot. However, the thing about Isadora is that her stats are actually not that bad. They're just a little bit below the benchmarks in which she needs to be useful. One of her main issues for me have always been her low survivability, so I've given her +4 base HP to make her a little bit more durable, and I've also increased every other stat that she has by 1, including her constitution. Now, this may not seem like a massive buff, but the +1 in all stats is actually going to make her hit a few important benchmarks, and considering the extra con is effectively increasing her speed by 2, it means she's actually going to be doubling a lot more units now, so definitely give her a go. She's pretty decent now. Next up is Heath, and I do realize that I'm a little biased because I've never really had a good Heath. I know he can become pretty damn good, but I always found his start a little lackluster. I guess it's because he's a Wyvern Knight. Wyvern Knights have always been so badass in Fire Emblem, and yet he joins with rather meddling bases. Now, I know he can grow well, and I know he becomes really good, but I still felt like he needed a little bit of a boost, so I've given him +1 to all of his stats, including Constitution. His low con always bothered me a little bit, so this should be a little bit remedied now. And yeah, if you train him, he's definitely going to become quite strong. Next up is Wrath, and with all the buffs to bows, the extra might, the triple effectiveness, he's definitely in a very good spot right now, but I still feel like when he comes in, he's a little bit behind everyone else. I know it's quite easy to train him, he can use the Brave Bow at base, which is kind of nice, but I still felt like he needed a slight buff, so again, I've given him a +1 bonus to all of his stats, which I know is not a very exciting buff, but it's certainly a buff you're going to feel in the game. Next up is Wallace, and if Isadora is one of the most disappointing pre-promotes, then Wallace is definitely the most disappointing pre-promote in the game. He's just incredibly bad. All he has is good strength and defense, but his speed is so atrocious. Fire Emblem 7 enemies are very slow, but Wallace is actually one of the few playable characters you have, which could get doubled, which is just not great. So I've given him a huge buff to his bases. He has +4 extra HP, +2 strength, +2 speed, +4 skill, +4 luck, +2 defense, and +4 res. So his stats should now be pretty damn good. He should actually be able to work decently in the mid to late game as a general, which I feel is warranted because he joins so damn late. Now this is gonna make him pretty busted in Lin mode, but keep in mind I did buff Lin hard mode, so you might actually need Wallace in the final chapters. I've also just made him join as a general in that mode now. You don't get the option to not promote him and give the Knight's Crest to Kent and Sane. I was never a big fan of this, I just felt like it was a bit exploitable. However, to make up for this, I have added an extra stealable Knight's Crest in the game itself. So if you usually use this Knight's Crest to promote one of your Cavaliers, at the very least you shouldn't be behind a crest this time around. Next up is Louise, and obviously she's perfect just the way she is and needs no changes. But for the sake of balance, I had to. I always found her base strength a little low, so she gets a +2 bonus to strength and a +4 bonus to luck. Now the reason why I've increased her luck is simply just to enhance her gimmick of being able to deal with Luna Druids. That's like one of the few things she does really well in the base game, but because some of those Druids might have a little bit of a higher stats in the endgame now, I buffed her luck accordingly to make sure that she doesn't face crit against them. And this extra luck just gives her a little bit of extra survivability, making her a little bit harder to hit. And a small little thing that I'm also doing to multiple characters, which some of you may have noticed at this point, is that I'm readjusting their portraits so that they're actually more in focus. I've also given her some much cooler animations that actually corresponds more to her outfit in the official art, and I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. Up next is Karel, and Karel is also in a tough spot because you have to choose between either him or Harkin, and Harkin is just way better in every way. And Harkin will still be better in this patch. I mean, you just can't compete with a hero with hard mode bonuses. But Karel's big issue to me was always just the fact that he had really low strength, and a Swordmaster is supposed to kill things, and Karel could not always kill things, which is atrocious. So I've given him +3 extra base strength. He should now hit a lot harder, and keep in mind, because he often crits and because he often doubles, +3 extra base strength is actually a lot more than just +3 extra damage. It basically means he deals 6 extra damage in most battles, and if he crits, it can be even more than that. So this is a pretty significant damage boost. Next up is Nino, and Nino obviously needs a lot of help. She joins incredibly underleveled very late, and even if you train her up, all you get is like a slightly better pent, because her growth rates are not good enough to offset her horrendous bases. So I've given her a pretty big buff. She just gets a flat out +4 in every stat that she has, except for HP and defense, because I feel like Nino should still be a glass cannon. She's still a tiny little girl, so it doesn't make sense for me that she has a lot of base defense, but all of her other stats are incredibly good now. So she's a bit of a glass cannon, but if you train her up to max level, she's definitely going to cap most of her offensive stats and be a really strong sage. Next up, we have Vaida, and Vaida in the base game is actually quite terrifying. She has monstrous strength and really high defense, to the point where she almost doesn't care about archers. Now keep in mind, in this patch, archers deal triple damage, so she definitely cannot get away with that anymore. But I always found that she was a little bit slow. Her base speed was just a little on the low side. She can double most generics, but she struggles against promoted enemies. So I've given her a +2 bonus to her speed. That way, she should be a lot better at fighting. Again, I always thought Vaida was good, but I just feel like she needs a little bit of a boost, especially considering at this point, the late game will definitely be a little bit harder than the base one, because I'm starting to buff enemies here. So yeah, she definitely needs this change to stay competitive. Up next, we have Carla, and yes, Carla, she is, she's so bad. I mean, you need to do so much to get her to repair, and then when you get her, all you get is this kind of shitty Swordmaster that can't do anything. I mean, she's just horrible. She's an Easter egg unit, she's not supposed to be good, but I think that's a shame, because she's so hard to get, and you have to go through so much effort in order to get her. and then when you get her, she just sucks. So yeah, I've changed Carla quite considerably. First of all, she appears regardless of what you do in Hector Hard Mode now. You don't need a level 5 warrior Bartra. You don't even need Bartra. She's going to show up regardless. Now, of course, if you haven't trained Bartra, it's going to be very tough to recruit her, because you still need to talk to her and survive a round of combat against her. But if you somehow have a Bartra that is not level 5, I mean, you might be able to survive it, I don't know. However, there is an alternate way to recruit Carla now. You can just talk to her with Corel, which I have no idea why this isn't in the base game. She's literally searching for Corel, and yet he doesn't have the ability to talk to her in this chapter, which is so incredibly stupid. So yeah, if you recruit Corel, he can just recruit Carla by default now. You don't actually even need Bartra alive for it anymore. As for her stats, yeah, I gave her a massive buff. +4 to all stats except for her defense. Now, she definitely needs all these buffs because the chapter after this is Victory or Death, one of the hardest chapters in this patch. So yeah, she will need all the help she can get. I'm not even sure if she'll be able to be all that good even with these buffs, but she should at least be able to keep up. And lastly, we have Renault, and he's one of the last characters to join you. He's pretty bad. His stats are good, but his base magic sucks at 12. So all I've done with Renault is just to give him a +6 bonus to his magic, putting it up to 18. So he can actually contribute a little bit now. He's a good candidate to train if you need an Aureola user. He starts at A rank in light magic, so he can get there feasibly well. And with his new magic, he should actually be able to fight a little bit now. Alright, so with those character changes over with, it's now time to talk about the 4 new playable characters that I added to this game. This was more of just a fun thing to do. It's not really part of balancing it. I just felt like it would be kind of fun to have some extra playable characters to have fun with. And the first one is Bada. Yes, he is playable in this hack. He shows up in Lynn's joining chapter, Noble Lady of Kalen. You talk to him with Lynn to recruit him. And the thing about Bada is he's actually not very good. I retained his bases and growth rates. I just scaled his level up a little bit, and his growth rates aren't even that good. I think he only has slightly better growth rates than the base Brigand class growths. So yeah, he's not going to be very good, and his con is kind of shitty, so he can't really wield Axis all that well, but hey, it's a playable Brigand, I guess, and if you promote him to Berserker, you might become a little bit good, maybe? I don't know. I have fun with Bada if you want, but he's certainly not going to be amazing or break the game in any way. The next character I've added is one that I definitely think the developers intended to be playable in some form, and that is Layla. I mean, she has official artwork. Why would she have official artwork if she's just supposed to be some generic NPC that gets killed? I personally have a theory that they intended for there to be a way for you to save her, but they just either scrapped it or they just didn't have the time to implement it properly, so they just kept the death scene in. So what I've done is I've just removed the death scene altogether, and she now joins you in the chapter New Resolve. And I've kept her bases and growth rates exactly the same. Her stats are actually incredible. She joins with capped speed, and she can wield the silver sword at base, so she's actually by far one of the best combat thieves you get in the game. However, her growth rates are very strange. They're very high in all areas, but she has a 0% speed growth. And I don't really understand why she's like this, but I decided that it's such a unique facet to her that I kept it this way, so she will never level speed naturally. You'll have to give her speed wings if you want her speed to increase. However, she should feasibly cap almost every other one of her stats, so her combat will actually be incredible, and with 20 base speed, she will double most enemies in this game. She's not going to have any issues with speed whatsoever, and yeah, if you promote her to Assassin, which you can do, and I've given her some amazing new animations for it, she is probably going to be one of the best combat assassins in the game. Now, I didn't mention this with Bada, but I have in fact added support conversations to the new playable units. They don't have text, they just trigger, but they are there, and there may even be a paired ending here or there if you do certain things. I only felt that that was natural, you know? The third playable character that you get towards the end is Fargus. He's another character that I definitely think they intended to make playable. He will join you in the chapter Victory or Death, and trust me, you will need him. That chapter is really hard. And yeah, he already has bases and growth rates, so all I did was just put him in and have him join, and that's pretty much about it. You only get him for a few chapters, but his stats are pretty okay. I mean, he's not going to be amazing. I think a trained dart will be better than him, but yeah, he can certainly do some fighting. I mean, Berserkers are always good, so he will help you out a little bit in Victory or Death if you have a bit of an unprepared team. And lastly, and I think this might be the change that most people will be excited about. You can recruit Lloyd or Linus, depending on which one of them is the boss in Cog of Destiny. You need Nino for this, she's the only one who can recruit them, but if you get Nino all the way over to their throne, she can talk to them and convince them to join your party. Now, you will get them at the same strength as they were initially in their first chapter, because their Cog of Destiny stats are quite insane, and yeah, you can obviously also only get one of them. You can get Lloyd or Linus, but yeah, they're pretty good, so yeah, I guess this is a reward for recruiting and keeping Nino alive. Alright, so that is it, I think. There are actually a bunch of other changes that I forgot to mention, like, for example, how I've just removed weather from the game, like no more rain or snow, stuff like that, and just tons of little minor changes that I probably forgot to mention in this video, but you'll find out once you start playing the game. But yeah, as I said, you can head over to the Mang's Hacking Archive, you can get this hack right now, definitely play it, and leave some comments about how you're liking the hack. And if you manage to beat the final chapter, definitely film it if you're able to do that, upload it to YouTube and send me the link and I will go check it out and leave a comment. I always love seeing people playing my hacks, so that's always cool. And yeah, just let me know what you think about these changes. Do you think it actually makes Fire Emblem 7 better, or do you disagree with some of the changes that I made? Do you think some of them were unnecessary? And yeah, just go have fun with Fire Emblem 7 and let me know what you think about the silly little hack that I made over the course of a week. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the game. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.